The world knew Ace Frehley as Kiss's mysterious space ace, the silver-masked guitar hero who never broke character. But on June 23, 1978, at Detroit's Cobo Hall, his carefully crafted image literally fell apart in front of 12,000 screaming fans. What happened next proved that sometimes the most authentic moments come from the most unexpected disasters, and that the real Ace Frehley was even cooler than the character he played. Every night before a Kiss show, Ace Frehley underwent a transformation ritual that took nearly an hour. First came the silver makeup, applied with precision until Paul Daniel Frehley from the Bronx disappeared behind metallic face paint and black star patterns. Then came the costume, and that costume was a masterpiece of rock and roll excess that had been through hell and back over the past 18 months of relentless touring. The suit was custom designed by Larry Legaspi, the same designer who'd created costumes for LaBelle and other theatrical acts. It was constructed from silver spandex stretched over a reinforced internal structure, covered with thousands of hand-applied rhinestones that caught every stage light like a human disco ball. The shoulder pieces were built up with padding to create Space Ace's imposing silhouette, and the entire thing was held together by reinforced seams that had been tested for durability, but never for the kind of punishment Kiss's stage show demanded night after night after night. Here's what the audiences filling arenas across America didn't know. Ace had gained about 15 pounds since the costume was first fitted in late 1976. The combination of arena food, late-night drinking, and the physical toll of touring had changed his body, and the suit that once fit perfectly now strained against him every time he moved. The costume department had let out the seams as much as possible, adding elastic panels where they could. But there was only so much they could do. The suit was literally held together by prayers, creative tailoring, and increasingly stressed fabric. Before the Detroit show, Ace's costume assistant had noticed some concerning wear on the shoulder seams, but figured they'd hold for one more night. After all, they'd held through 100 previous shows. What could go wrong in Detroit? That kind of optimism is dangerous in rock and roll, where Murphy's Law operates with particular cruelty. Cobo Hall was packed with 12,000 fans who'd paid to see Kiss deliver their legendary spectacle. The show had been building perfectly. Gene had breathed fire during Firehouse. Paul had soared above the crowd during Love Gun, and Peter's drum solo had gotten the expected massive response. Now it was time for Ace's moment, his signature song, Shock Me, where Space Ace stepped into the spotlight and reminded everyone why he was considered one of rock's most innovative guitarists. Ace moved to center stage, his silver costume reflecting the lights in 1,000 different directions. He raised his Les Paul, hit the opening riff, and the crowd erupted. This was his moment, the peak of every Kiss show, when the quiet guitarist let his instrument do the talking. He was 3 minutes into the solo, fingers flying across the fretboard, when he executed one of his signature moves. A dramatic spin combined with a deep knee bend that always got a huge response from the audience. That's when physics, fabric stress, and bad luck converged. The strain on the costume's shoulder seam, already weakened by months of wear, reached its breaking point. With a sound like tearing canvas amplified through the stage monitors, the entire left side of Ace's costume split open from shoulder to hip, a jagged tear that exposed his pale skin beneath the silver spandex. But it didn't stop there. The structural integrity of the suit had been compromised, and momentum took over. As Ace came out of his spin, the tear expanded, racing across his back and down his right side like a zipper being yanked open. Within seconds, The carefully constructed Space Ace costume had been reduced to hanging strips of silver fabric, rhinestones popping off and scattering across the stage like glitter confetti, the padded shoulders drooping comically, and Ace Frehley standing center stage essentially shirtless in front of 12,000 people. The band kept playing, locked into the groove, but you could see the moment of recognition on each member's face. Gene's demon makeup couldn't hide his shock. Paul actually missed a backup vocal cue. Peter, elevated on his drum riser, had a perfect view of the disaster and nearly dropped a stick. The 12,000 fans in Cobo Hall experienced a collective moment of stunned silence, trying to process whether this was part of the show or something much worse. Most performers would have panicked, run off stage, stopped the show. But Ace Frehley had spent his entire life learning not to panic when things went sideways. The Bronx had taught him to roll with chaos. Countless bar gigs had taught him that shows don't stop for technical difficulties. Kiss had taught him that perception shapes reality. All of those lessons crystallized in the moment when his costume fell apart, and he had exactly 2 seconds to decide how to respond. Ace looked down at his ruined costume, strips of silver fabric hanging off him like he'd been attacked by a very fashionable tiger. He looked out at the stunned crowd. Then he did something so perfectly in character, so quintessentially Ace Frehley, that it instantly transformed disaster into legend. He shrugged, adjusted his guitar strap, and kept playing the solo without missing a single note. Not only did he keep playing, but he started moving more freely than he had all night, liberated from the restrictive costume that had been squeezing him for months. His fingers found runs on the fretboard that the tight suit had made difficult. His stage movements became looser, more natural, more genuine. Space Ace had always been cool and untouchable, but this was different. This was real. The crowd's stunned silence lasted maybe 3 seconds before transforming into thunderous applause and laughter. Not mocking laughter, but the kind of genuine, joyful response that comes from witnessing something completely unexpected and somehow perfect. 12,000 people watching a silver-masked guitar hero deal with a wardrobe disaster by simply not caring about it and continuing to shred like nothing had happened. Gene Simmons, watching from stage left, later said his first thought was genuine concern for his bandmate, followed immediately by pure admiration for Ace's unflappable response. Paul Stanley forgot to be worried because he was too busy being impressed. This was the Ace they knew off stage, the guy who never seemed rattled by anything, now revealing that quality to the entire audience. After finishing the Shock Me solo, still wearing the tattered remains of his Space Ace costume like some kind of post-apocalyptic rock warrior, Ace walked to his microphone and delivered a line in his characteristic deadpan voice that brought down the house. "Guess I should have skipped lunch today." When the backup plan becomes the main event. While Ace was turning his wardrobe disaster into the most talked-about moment of the tour, backstage chaos was erupting. His costume assistant was frantically searching for the backup suit, which was supposed to be readily accessible for exactly this kind of emergency. Problem: nobody could find it. In the chaos of touring, equipment management, and constant movement between venues, the backup costume had been packed in the wrong case and shipped ahead to the next city. There was no replacement Space Ace suit anywhere in Cobo Hall. The crew had approximately 4 songs to figure out a solution before Ace would need to change for the encore. 4 songs to somehow restore Space Ace's iconic look, or at least create something that wouldn't completely destroy the theatrical illusion Kiss had spent years building. Panic was setting in until one of the lighting technicians had a brilliant idea. They had dozens of silver Mylar emergency blankets, the kind used by marathons and disaster relief, stored with the equipment for protecting gear during transport. Someone grabbed a roll of gaffer tape, the universal solution to all touring problems. Within 90 seconds, they'd created a plan that was either genius or completely insane. During Rock and Roll All Night, 2 crew members casually walked onto stage as if it were planned choreography. They carried silver Mylar material and gaffer tape, and in full view of the 12,000 fans, they began wrapping Ace in the reflective material, creating something that looked like a futuristic toga meets emergency rescue blanket meets abstract art installation. The gaffer tape, applied strategically, held everything together while creating black accent lines that actually complemented the silver material. The crowd loved every second of it. What could have been an embarrassing moment of obvious damage control instead became interactive theater, the audience watching Ace being reconstructed in real time. Someone in the front row shouted, "Space Mummy!" and the nickname stuck, spreading through the crowd until thousands of people were chanting it. When the crew finished their onstage costume repair, Ace struck a pose showing off his new look, and the place went absolutely crazy. He looked ridiculous and somehow more futuristic than the original Space Ace costume. The Mylar caught the stage lights differently than rhinestones, creating bizarre reflection patterns that made him look like he was constantly shifting and changing. It was weird, it was improvised, and it was absolutely perfect. The aftermath nobody expected. The next morning, Detroit newspapers ran photos of Ace in his emergency Mylar costume with headlines like "Space Ace Goes Solar" and "Kiss Guitarist Wraps Up a Great Show." Music journalists who'd been covering the concert for routine tour reviews suddenly had an actual story worth telling. Rock radio DJs across the country discussed the incident, and every retelling made Ace sound cooler and more unflappable. What started as a costume malfunction became proof of Kiss's authenticity and ability to roll with unexpected chaos. Ticket sales for upcoming tour dates spiked as fans hoped to witness similar spontaneous moments. Gene Simmons, never one to miss a marketing opportunity, started incorporating references to the Detroit incident in interviews, though he always let Ace tell the story himself, understanding that the mystique worked best when Space Ace downplayed the drama. Larry Legaspi, the original costume designer, was initially horrified that his creation had failed so spectacularly. But when he saw photos of the improvised Mylar replacement, something clicked. He started experimenting with incorporating emergency blanket material into future costume designs, creating layered looks that combined traditional fabric with reflective Mylar panels. What began as a desperate backstage fix became a genuine innovation in rock costume design. For Ace personally, the incident was liberating in ways he didn't fully understand at first. He'd spent years feeling constrained by the Space Ace character, worried about maintaining the mystique and never breaking the illusion. But Detroit proved that the audience didn't need perfection. They needed authenticity. When his costume literally fell apart, and he responded by not caring and just playing his guitar, the crowd loved him more, not less. Years later, during a rare reflective interview, Ace discussed the Detroit costume disaster with surprising depth. "That night taught me something important," he said. "All the makeup and costumes, all the theatrical stuff, it was supposed to make us larger than life. But when the costume ripped and I just kept playing, that's when I felt most like myself. The Bronx kid who learned guitar in his bedroom didn't need silver spandex to be cool. He just needed to play." This revelation captures something essential about Ace Frehley's entire journey with Kiss. The tension between Paul Daniel Frehley and Space Ace wasn't a conflict between real identity and manufactured persona. It was a gradual realization that the best version of himself had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Detroit forced that emergence. When practical concerns like embarrassment and image should have overwhelmed him, Ace accessed something deeper. The understanding that authenticity matters more than perfection. The destroyed costume was never repaired. Ace kept the most intact piece as a souvenir, occasionally showing it to friends with a laugh and the story of how his worst on-stage moment became one of his best. The Mylar emergency replacement lasted exactly one more show before being retired to Kiss's growing archive of stage history. But photographs of Ace in that improvised costume, looking like a space-age mummy wrapped in emergency blankets and gaffer tape, became iconic images that captured something essential about rock and roll's beautiful chaos. Today, more than 4 decades later, the Detroit costume disaster remains one of rock music's most retold stories about grace under pressure. It appears in documentaries about Kiss, in analyses of live performance psychology, in discussions about authenticity versus image. New generations of musicians discover the story and find inspiration in Ace's cool-headed response to disaster. For the 12,000 fans who were actually at Cobo Hall that night, the incident became their personal rock and roll war story. Many reported that watching Ace handle the crisis without breaking character or losing composure changed how they thought about resilience and authenticity. One fan later wrote, "I was 14 years old, and seeing Ace just shrug and keep playing when his costume fell apart taught me more about handling embarrassment than any adult advice ever did." The lesson has outlasted the band and the era. Somewhere tonight, a young performer will hear about Ace's costume ripping apart and learn something essential about staying calm when everything goes wrong. Somewhere, someone facing unexpected chaos will remember that the best response is often to simply acknowledge the problem, deal with it, and keep going. That's why people still talk about the night Ace Frehley's costume ripped apart on stage, and his reaction made 12,000 fans scream with appreciation. It wasn't just rock and roll spectacle. It was a demonstration of something more valuable, knowing yourself well enough that when disaster strikes, you respond with grace, humor, and the unshakable cool of someone who's been handling chaos their entire life. The silver costume could tear. The careful image could fall apart. But the real Ace Frehley underneath was strong, enough to turn disaster into triumph with nothing but a shrug and a guitar solo.